Hey, welcome to the Go-To Physio Podcast. My name is Dave O'Sullivan, and in this podcast, my aim is to give you 15 years of my experience in professional sport and private practice and share that knowledge so that you can get real-world results with your complex patients who have failed traditional approaches. I hope you enjoy the show. Hey, welcome to the Go-To Physio episode number 48. My name is Dave O'Sullivan. Absolute great to have you here for another episode. Now, today's episode, again, it's going to be based on happy progressing patients. So we are in season 3 and this is episode 14, okay? So what I'm doing in this season is we're taking concepts from the book. We're going into a chapter usually at a time. Sometimes we go to a section of the book, not necessarily a chapter, and we go into it in a little bit more meaning for you. So you don't have to have the book to listen to this episode. You're still going to get a lot of value and be able to get information here that you can be able to take and implement in the real world with your patients today or tomorrow, okay? But if you do want to pick up the book, the gotophysio.com/book, that'll get you the book and you can use that as a resource as we go through as well. So what we're talking about today is we're talking about designing long-term strategies for success, okay? So how do we design rehab plans that's going to get long-lasting results? So, working in professional sport and day in, day out, we have to get long-lasting results. There's no point like getting quick changes with the athletes. So for example, I always use this example, a grade 2 hamstring tear. We could have the athlete pain-free on the bed within 10 days. It's not very uncommon for that, sometimes sooner, okay? Does that mean the athlete's ready to go back sprinting, training, playing after 10 days just because he's pain-free in the bed or she's pain-free in the bed? Absolutely not, okay? And again, if I put that athlete back and just let him go straight back into training, there's a high chance that that injury isn't healed. It's going to recur and potentially, lose my job. Okay, so I don't think that'd be very professional, and I don't think we'd be able to enjoy success as clinicians. So the key thing is that we get long-lasting results with patients. Now, how do we communicate that to the patient? We've talked a lot about that in the previous episode on answering the 4 pro sport questions. So that episode was actually episode 43. The 4 pro sport questions that must be answered with every private practice patient. So when we answer those 4 pro sport questions in the first session, that allows us the time to build the rehab plan that gets long-lasting results. So we have to set expectations before we get into this. Now, what I want to talk to you today is some of the concepts on page 124 in the book I talk about here. In order to design a long-lasting, value-based treatment plan, you must have identified 3 key things, okay? So you must have identified exactly where the patient is currently, okay? So that's point A. So we talked about that in last week's episode where we talked about making sense of the objective assessment. Where's the patient currently? What's not doing its job? That if it was doing its job, this pain would no longer be a problem in the first place, because we're going to have that information in order to change those things, okay, in order to get long-lasting results. So then when we put them back, those things are going to do their job. But then also we need to understand what is doing too much work, okay, or what's happening that if it wasn't happening, the pain would no longer be a problem. So usually this is the symptomatic area, okay, because very often we're going to have to dampen down the pain experience, and we may need to influence those tissues as well. So that's where in the 80-20 rule with the mentorship, I talk about 20% of my time on the symptoms, which would be those tissues, 80% of my time on what's not doing its job and building them up in a graded exposure manner. So we need to understand those 2 things to understand where the patient is currently. What are the symptomatic tissues that's maybe doing too much work? What isn't doing enough work? Then we need to identify number 2, exactly where the patient wants to get back to. So that's point B. So what's the end goal? So the end goal for a rugby union player, a rugby league player, is to get back on the pitch. They need to be able to tackle, accelerate, decelerate, change direction, pass, kick, whatever it is, okay? So we know exactly the end goal that we're optimizing the patient for, okay? Now, interestingly, when I worked with England Rugby Union in 2019 World Cup, one of the biggest challenges for us is you think, okay, well, you're trying to get the player back to meet the demands of a test match, whereas actually what was happening in our training sessions was the test matches wasn't the hardest session of the week. So the Wednesday session used to be kind of a game simulation essentially, and the intensity and the duration of those sessions on the Wednesday were actually higher usually than test matches, okay? So that's what we had to optimize for. We weren't just getting the athlete back to cope with the demands of a test match. We actually had to go above and beyond a test match so that they could cope with the Wednesday trainings, Okay, so that's really just the point where we have to understand where exactly we're getting our patient back to. Now in private practice, what are you getting your patient back to? So for the rugby player, they need to be able to tolerate the test match and the game simulation training on a Wednesday, all of the key components of that. Are you super clear on what you're essentially optimizing your patient to get back to? Okay, do they need to do gardening, lifting kids, shopping? And again, all of that, it starts in the subjective assessment. And then number 3, what's the obstacle or root problem that is preventing the patient from moving from where they are now to where they want to be? Okay, so again, we use that information of what's not happening. Because what's the big obstacle here, that if we got these things doing their job, this pain would no longer be a problem and it would stand the test of time where it's not going to come back again. So they're the key things here. Subjective objective assessment has given you all of those information, that information that's going to allow you to answer those 3 things. Okay, so, and then just another point out here that I say in page 124, when you just focus on a diagnosis, we completely miss point 3. Okay, what's the obstacle or root problem? As Keith Cunningham says, there's few things worse than running in the wrong direction enthusiastically. Okay, so again, we're full of hype in the first few sessions. We're designing this treatment plan and it's going the complete wrong direction. Okay, said another way, there are a few things worse than both you and your patient spending time, energy, and money working on a treatment plan that is solving a problem that isn't the problem in the first place, but a symptom. Okay, so to bring it back to principles, it's critical that we separate the problem from the symptoms before designing your treatment plan. Okay, so that's really where we have to be able to make sense of the symptoms, gain this information that empowers us to act. Okay, and if you can do that in your objective assessment, then that gives you the platform to design a long-lasting, effective treatment plan. Okay, so once we've done this, there'll be a few critical principles we need to understand and build into our treatment plan to ensure you achieve the dream outcome. Okay, so some of the key principles that we need to understand here is that there's a difference between top-down and bottom-up in rehab. Okay, so again, Louis Gifford in his books series Aches and Pains talks about top-down and bottom-up, and he talks a lot more from a top-down strategy around beliefs of the patient. Okay, but we can also use top-down strategies in terms of intention. Okay, so it's not just beliefs and thoughts, but it's actually focus. Okay, and I'll cover that in a second, how we can use focus to facilitate short-term the patient to change their movement behaviors and actually decrease their pain experience. Okay, and then bottom-up rehab. We have to bridge the gap from low to high-level rehab, and we have to build tripwires into a graded exposure treatment plan. Okay, so the terms top-down and bottom-up, that's the key thing that we want to think about and talk about in today's episode. So when we talk about top-down strategies, that's more of a brain model where we're using conscious intent, for example. So again, if I get you to stand up and you have back pain or you've got knee pain, and then I say, okay, what I want you to do is I want you to stand up. This time I want you to think about squashing an orange through your midfoot. Well, really think about squashing an orange through your midfoot now. So you have that intention, you consciously plantar flexing the foot or the ankle joint. We're getting the soleus to do a little bit more work. That's going to delay knee extension. It's going to allow the hip to be a little bit better and do more work. And then very often you're going to change the pain experience. Okay, so that's an example there of a top-down cue that I've used with my rehab. Okay, so if you've ever said to a patient, squeeze your glutes or push through the midfoot or whatever it is, we're using top-down cues there. Now, they're all well and good short-term, okay? But in the real world, when we get somebody back into the real world, they need to be able to do these things with a bottom-up approach. And that is where when the foot hits the floor, the communication system between the peripheral tissue and the spinal cord are able to do the majority of that without us having to consciously think about it. Because we just want to think about our intention. So when I go to pick up the water bottle, my intention is just to pick the water bottle up. I want an outcome or I want a sup of water. Okay? I don't want to be thinking about squashing oranges as I pick the bottle up or setting my scapula or my lower traps. I want all of that to happen outside of conscious control. Okay? So bottom up is when we can use the peripheral tissue and the communal and the spinal cord outside of conscious control. So again, the best example to understand that usually is when my foot hits the floor, I'm running on a trail, my foot hits the floor and it inverts a little bit, okay, it's an uneven surface. My peroneals sense that change in length and the speed at which the peroneals are changing, sends an information within milliseconds up to the spinal cord going, hey, I've changed length, through the afferent pathways, then the efferent pathways send a signal back saying, hey, contract peroneals. Okay, this is how much I want you to contract at this time. And this is all happening in milliseconds. Then as my ankle starts to roll, my ball and big toe pushes down a little bit more to stop me from falling. Or I might actually lean the other way. Okay, so you might see me side flex the other way to keep my balance. And my hip takes a bit more of the load. Okay, so there's a few different strategies there. And again, very often that's going to depend on your injury history and the belief system around your nervous system of tolerating load through tissues. So that would be an example of top and bottom up, where everything's just working outside of conscious control. So I didn't even have to think about firing my peroneals, my glute there. My body just does it subconsciously. And that's what the holy grail of where we want to get the patient back to. No patient wants to be pain-free, but have to think about touching their toes. So when they go to touch their toes, I have to hold my breath. I have to go through a process. Then I'm going to touch my toes slowly and cautiously. That's not an example of bottom up. Okay, that's an example, if anything, of top down, where they're trying to control every single bit of the movement. Okay, bottom up is when we do, as Louis Gifford talked about, thoughtless, fearless movement. Okay, it's free. We can do it quickly. We do it almost without thinking. We just focus on actually the intention of touching our toes. So we really need to understand the difference between the two of those. And then in page 128, I give you a few different graphs here, okay? So usually my approach is in the first few progressions, I'm using some top-down cues. So top-down cues are good and useful at the start, okay? So again, if you're using cues like squeeze your glutes and stuff like that, that's fine. I personally prefer to use more external cues where I'll get them to squash an orange through the midfoot or whatever to create the chain reaction up the chain. Then as we progress, we're going to start to use the top down and bottom up. So again, that's where I'm starting to use things like slouches, split squats, stuff like that. But I still might be doing those movements with some conscious intent. So as they come back up from a slouch, I might get them to push through the midfoot on the way back up again. So again, I'm using that top down intention to facilitate that. But there's a lot of bottom up stuff happening as well outside of conscious control. And then as I get up to graded exposure ladder, bridging from low to high level rehab, that's where we're going exclusively bottom up. So that's where then I might be doing a leap or something like that, getting the patient to reach just as they land, challenge their base of support, create that bit of chaos, create that length change through the peroneals again, just like they would in a trail or the glute med, and force those tissues to communicate to the spinal cord outside of conscious control. And there's ways we can design rehab exercises to create that environment for those things to happen very, very easily once we understand principles. Okay, and at that point, then we can get to thoughtless, fearless movement, okay, where we expose them to those things. And the last thing I want to say about that and thoughtless, fearless movement is that thoughtless, fearless movement comes from doing the work, okay? I always say this to therapists, confidence comes from doing the work, okay? You don't wake up one morning and you're confident. How we build confidence is exposing the patient to these loads and doing the work. Okay, so if they don't have belief or they're a bit nervous, we have to expose them at the right time to these tissues, show that it's safe, update the belief system, and then very often they'll usually start quite rigid. And then as they progress and they do a couple more reps, then they'll usually go from rigid to relaxed. Okay, and that's a good sign then that they're well on the way to thoughtless, fearless movement. But you're not doing your patient a favor by having them pain-free, and every time they go to touch their toes, they have to hold their breath or worry about paying for later. If they need that extra couple of sessions to expose them to the situations that they're going to do in real life and give them the confidence to move with speed and movement, just like if their kid was running out in front of a car and they had to reach down quickly and grab them, we have to expose them to these positions, show them that it's safe, update the belief system, and give these tissues an opportunity to work outside of conscious control. And that's usually where we have to bridge the gap from low to high level. And working in pro sport, both myself and mentoring pro sport head physios, that's usually where the shit hits the fan. Okay, that's where things break down. It's when the athlete's about to go back running or they go back running and we're starting to get to the high level rehab, that's usually where things start to fall apart usually. There's not a whole lot of things fall apart in the first couple of sessions. It's that bridging the gap from low to high level rehab, that's where you start to run into bother if you don't have a good foundation in place. So there are some key concepts that I think is really important in understanding that we have to get to thoughtless, fearless movement. We have to be able to work bottom up essentially, okay? And the last thing I want to talk about is building tripwires into your graded exposure treatment plan. So I talk about that on page 136, 137. So there's two potential flare-ups usually I see with patients, and that is when we get them from sitting to standing, okay, that's usually, or we progress them from the bed to standing, that's usually where they can flare up. But the big one is when they're about to start running again, okay, or we get patients back running or something like that. So some of the tripwires that we build in, we might do a midfoot bridge test before we get the patient standing. That's where we're going to put a lot of load through soleus and hamstring. Can they actually tolerate the load, or are they cramping? If they're cramping, then we know that we might need to expose those tissues to a bit more load before we progress them to standing. In regards to the hopping progressions and running, we might expose the patient to some hopping progressions where we know that we're going to increase the ground reaction forces more so than the need when they start jogging again. So if they can, but it's in a more controlled environment with less dosage. So if they can do that and there's no pain to keep their key performance indicators good, then happy days. We know then, okay, we've taken away the emotion. We know logically that they can tolerate these ground reaction forces. The nervous system is happy. They're ready to start running again. So that's something as well that I think is really important, is you build in tripwires into your treatment plan. Okay, and again, on page 140 here, I look at a graph from Scarf et al. And again, it's talking about the ground reaction forces of hopping versus jogging versus sprinting. Okay, so they're the key principles that we need to build a successful treatment plan. And then the key thing then obviously in the next session is we need to obviously be able to communicate that to the patient. So to sum up today, to recap, 3 key components, okay? Where's the patient currently? In order to develop long-lasting treatment plans, where are they currently? What's not doing its job, okay? Where do they want to get back to? What are the movements they need to do? What are the peripheral tissues that need to be exposed, both to tolerate high levels of tension and speed of movement? What are the situations we need to create, that little bit of chaos where they're going to be rigid at the start to go to relaxed movement, to build that thoughtless, fearless movement, okay? And then what's that obstacle in the way, okay? That if it wasn't in the way, they would achieve that. We understand those 3 things. That's going to give us the best chance to design value-based treatment plans. Within that value-based treatment plan, we know there's going to be top-down cues at times, especially as we start out, to help them be successful. There's going to be bottom-up cues, which again is going to be the back end of the treatment plan. But ultimately, the holy grail is to get to thoughtless, fearless movement by exposing them to these situations. Okay, so I hope you found that useful. If you want to know more information about the Go-To Physio mentorship method, if you want help implementing this in your clinical practice, then head over to thegotophysio.com/mentorship. Schedule a call with myself, Shane, and my team, my head physio, Shane, and we can have a chat, see if it's suitable for you, and then we'll answer all your questions, show you around, and show you how everything works. Okay, so that's it from me for this week. Hope you enjoyed the episode. If you got value from the episode, please share it with another colleague, another therapist, or don't be afraid also, please leave us a review on your thoughts on the show as well, because it just helps it get to other people and other clinicians to help them have the confidence to help any complex patient who comes through their door. If we do that, we help more people, plain and simple. All right, so that's it for this week. I'll see you next week. Have a great week ahead, making meaningful impacts on people's lives, transforming patients' confidence, and also transforming your own confidence. I'll see you next time.